Marcus woke slowly, like a man climbing out of a deep well into bright sunlight. His body ached in ways he had never experienced before, and his memories of the past few hours came back in fragments. The crying child, the collapsed tunnels, the vacuum. The being he tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through every muscle and bone in his battered frame. "Do not move," a familiar voice said gently. "The medical machines are still working on you, and if you disrupt their efforts, I will be very cross with you." Marcus turned his head and saw Scythe standing by the window of the medical bay, her translucent blue skin glowing softly in the station's artificial light. She looked tired but healthy, with fresh bandages on her arms where the fallen equipment had cut her. "Kira?" Marcus croaked, his throat still raw from the vacuum exposure in answer. He felt something move against his side, and he looked down to see the little Valorian girl curled up on the bed next to him. Her small hand wrapped tightly around one of his fingers. She was asleep, her 4 eyes closed and her breathing slow and peaceful, and she looked more content than any child had a right to look after everything she had been through. "She refused to leave your side," Celeste said with a soft smile. "The doctors tried to take her to a separate room, but she screamed and cried until they gave up. She said she had to make sure her human was going to be okay." "Her human," Marcus repeated, and something warm spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the medical equipment. Celeste walked closer to the bed and looked down at him with those 4 luminous eyes that seemed to see right through to his soul. "You should have died," she said quietly. "The doctors said your injuries were unlike anything they had ever seen. Burst blood vessels, torn muscles, frostbite, radiation exposure, oxygen deprivation, and at least 3 fractures in your spine from lifting that beam. Any other species would have died 10 times over. Humans are hard to kill," Marcus said with a weak grin. "So I am beginning to understand," Scythe replied. "But that does not explain why you did what you did. You could have walked away at any point. You could have given up and saved yourself. But you kept going even when your own body was failing." Marcus thought about the question for a long moment, staring up at the ceiling of the medical bay with its soft lights and gentle hum. "When I was a boy," he finally said, "my father told me a story about a mountain climber who got lost in a blizzard. He was freezing to death, barely able to move, when he stumbled across another climber who was even worse off. The first climber had a choice. He could save his own strength and try to make it to safety alone, or he could carry the other man and probably die in the attempt. What did he do?" Scythe asked. "He carried the other man," Marcus said. "And here is the strange part. By carrying that extra weight, by forcing his body to work harder, the first climber generated enough heat to keep them both alive until rescuers found them. If he had left the other man behind, he would have frozen to death alone." Scythe considered this story with her scientific mind. "So by trying to save another, he saved himself. That is the lesson my father wanted me to learn," Marcus agreed. "But I think the real truth is simpler than that. Sometimes you have to decide what kind of person you want to be, and then you have to be that person even when it hurts." Kira stirred in her sleep and mumbled something in Valorian that Marcus did not understand, and her small fingers squeezed his hand tighter outside the medical bay. Something was happening in the station through the window. Marcus could see crowds of aliens gathering in the corridors, staring at screens that showed footage from the security cameras in Sector 9. He saw himself on those screens, crawling through the vacuum with frozen skin and bulging eyes. He saw himself lifting the impossible beam while his muscles tore and his bones cracked. He saw himself refusing to give up, even when every logical calculation said he should already be dead. Tovani Merchant stood near the front of the crowd, the same gray-skinned creature who had laughed about stupid Deathworlders. Back in the food court, the merchant was not laughing now. Instead, He watched the footage with an expression that humans would recognize as shame. And when the video showed Marcus collapsing after the lift, the Tovani bowed his six-armed body in a gesture of profound respect. A Kreth mathematician clicked its mandibles nervously as it watched, its compound eyes reflecting the image of a human doing something that defied all logical probability. Impossible, the Kreth whispered. The odds of survival were less than 1 in 10,000. No rational being would attempt such a feat, beside the Kreth. A young alien of a species Marcus did not recognize spoke in a voice filled with wonder. Maybe humans are not rational, the young one said. Maybe that is what makes them special. The legend had begun in the days that followed. The story of the human who walked into the void to save. Strangers spread across the station, and then across the sector, and then across the galaxy itself. Ships carried the tale to distant worlds where humans had never set foot. Scholars debated what it meant about human nature and whether other species could learn from the example. Children of 100 different races heard the story at bedtime and dreamed of the warm-blooded Deathworlders who ran into danger instead of away from it. When Marcus was finally well enough to leave the medical bay, he found Kira waiting for him in the corridor with a piece of paper clutched in her small hands. "I made this for you," she said shyly, holding up the paper for him to see. It was a drawing, crude and simple in the way that all children's drawings are crude and simple. But it showed a tall figure with 2 arms and 2 legs holding up what looked like a ceiling, while 2 smaller figures ran underneath. The tall figure was labeled in shaky Valorian script that Salaith translated for him with tears in her eyes. "My human." Marcus knelt down and hugged the little girl, feeling her small cold body press against his warm human chest. "Thank you, Kira," he said softly. "I'm going to keep this forever. You promise?" "I promise." Salath approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Where will you go now?" she asked. "Back to work," Marcus said, standing up with Kira still in his arms. "There are always more cargo runs, more colonies that need supplies, more places where a stubborn human can make himself useful. Will you come back to visit us?" Marcus looked at the little girl who had changed his life with nothing but tears and hope. And then he looked at her mother, who had learned that humans were not the monsters she had always believed them to be. "I will come back," he'd promised. "Every chance I get, I will come back." He set Kira down and walked toward the docking bay where his ship was waiting, its engines repaired and its hold empty and ready for the next job. As he passed through the station, aliens who would have ignored him before now stopped and stared with something new in their eyes. Not fear, not disgust, but respect. The Tovani merchant actually bowed as Marcus walked past, and the human nodded in return. Without saying a word, he reached his ship and climbed aboard, settling into the pilot's seat with a groan as his healing injuries protested the movement on the console in front of him. He pinned Kira's drawing where he could see it every day, the tall figure holding up the sky. Labeled, "My Human," Marcus smiled and started the engines across the galaxy. A new story was being told in cantinas and trading posts and children's bedrooms. It was the story of the species from the death world who walked into fire, into void, into certain doom, not for glory or profit or any logical reason, but because a child cried, "Please," and that, the storytellers agreed, was what made humans truly terrifying. Not their strength, or their endurance, or their ability to survive the impossible, but their stubborn, inexplicable, utterly irrational love. The ship lifted off and disappeared into the stars, carrying one tired human toward his next adventure. And in the medical bay of Galactic Transit Station, Omega 7, a little Valorian girl pressed her hand against the window and whispered a promise to the universe. "When I am grown, I will tell everyone what humans truly are." She watched the stars where her human had vanished, and her 4 eyes glowed with a determination that her mother had never seen before. Protectors, Kira said softly. They are protectors, and the universe for once listened. The corridors shook with each step they took, and dust fell from the ceiling like gray snow as the damaged sector slowly tore itself apart around them. Selith wrapped one arm around Marcus and helped him stumble forward while her daughter ran ahead, calling back directions through the maze of broken hallways. Left here, Mom. The right tunnel is blocked. Marcus could barely see through his swollen eyes, and his legs felt like they belonged to someone else. But he forced himself to keep moving, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant failing. He would not fail, not today. Not when they were so close to escape. You are burning hot, Scythe said with wonder in her voice as she felt the heat radiating from his injured body. Your species runs so much hotter than mine. It is like touching a living star. Sorry about that, Marcus mumbled through cracked and bleeding lips. Do not apologize, she replied. Your warmth is keeping me alive. I was so cold in that lab, but now I feel like I could walk 1,000 miles. They climbed over a pile of debris together. Scythe's thin limbs surprisingly strong as she helped pull Marcus up and over the obstacle on the other side. They paused for a moment to catch their breath while Kira ran back to report on the path ahead. The way is mostly clear, the little girl said. But there is a big piece of metal blocking the last corridor before the safe zone. How big? Marcus asked Kira spread her arms as wide as they would go, which was not very wide at all. Bigger than me, bigger than Mom. Maybe bigger than you. Marcus nodded grimly and started moving again, leaning less on Scythe now as his body slowly recovered from its ordeal in the vacuum. The human ability to heal and adapt was already working its strange magic, pushing blood to his damaged tissues and clearing the swelling from his eyes. He still felt like he had been run over by a cargo hauler, but at least he could see where he was going as they walked. Scythe looked at him with those 4 luminous eyes that seemed to glow in the dim emergency lighting. I do not understand you, she admitted quietly. My people have always believed that humans are dangerous savages, barely civilized beings who solve every problem with violence and brute force. Your people are not wrong about that, Marcus said with a painful chuckle. But you came into the forbidden zone to save strangers. Scythe continued. You walked through poison air and crawled through the vacuum of space. And you are still walking even though your body is broken and bleeding. Why would you do all of this for people you do not even know? Marcus thought about the question for a long moment before he answered. Because your daughter asked me to help, he finally said. Because she looked at everyone in that food court with hope in her eyes, and everyone looked away except for me. Because I have a little girl back home who is about the same age as Kira, and I would want someone to help her if she was lost and scared and alone. That is the only reason? Because a child cried? That is the only reason I need, Marcus said, and his voice was firm despite the pain. Where I come from, we have a saying, no one left behind. It does not matter if you are human or Valorian or anything else. If you need help, and I can give it, then I will give it. Scythe was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with an emotion that humans would recognize as shame. I have spent my whole life studying the galaxy and the creatures that live in it, she said. I thought I understood so much, but I did not understand humans at all. We called you Deathworlders and barbarians and monsters, but you are none of those things. Oh, we are definitely Deathworlders, Marcus said with a grin. Have you seen our planet? It is trying to kill us all the time, and we just keep building cities and having picnics, despite everything. Scythe laughed, and her laughter sounded like tiny bells. Ringing in the darkness, they reached the final corridor and found the obstacle that Kira had warned them about. A massive structural beam had fallen from the ceiling and now blocked the entire passage, wedged so tightly between the walls that there was no way to climb over or crawl under it on the other side. barely visible through a small gap. They could see the sealed bulkhead that led to the safe zone and salvation. "We are so close," Kira whimpered, pressing her face against the cold metal. "I can see the door. I can see it." Saleith examined the beam from every angle, her scientific mind searching for a solution. "It is too heavy to move," she concluded with despair. "We would need machinery to lift this, and there is no machinery here." Marcus looked at the beam, then looked at his shaking hands, then looked back at the beam again. "How heavy?" he asked quietly. "At least 300 kilograms, probably more. I have lifted heavier." Saleith stared at him with horror in her 4 eyes. "You cannot be serious. Your body is already damaged beyond anything I have ever seen survive. If you try to lift that beam, you could break your spine. You could tear your muscles from your bones. You could kill yourself." "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "I probably could." He walked forward and placed his hands against the cold metal of the beam, feeling its weight and its balance, understanding what he was about to attempt. "Human," Saleith said, and her voice cracked with emotion. "Marcus, please. There must be another way." "There is no other way," he replied without turning around. "And we are out of time. Take Kira and get ready to run through as soon as I lift this thing. But you might not be able to follow us." Marcus finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were calm despite the fear that must have been screaming in his heart. "Then I will not follow," he said simply. "But you will be safe, and Kira will have her mother. And that is what matters." "Why?" Saleith asked, tears streaming down her face now. "Why do you humans always do this? Why do you sacrifice yourselves for others?" Marcus smiled, and it was a gentle smile filled with pain and love and something that could only be called hope, because that is what makes us human, he said. "Now get ready to run." He turned back to the beam, planted his feet firmly on the ground, and wrapped his arms around the cold metal. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest as he began to lift, his back bending under a weight that no single human should ever try to carry. He thought about Sophie, about the way she used to ride on his shoulders and pretend he was a giant walking through the clouds. He thought about Kira, about the desperate hope in her eyes when she had grabbed his leg and begged for help. He thought about all the humans who had come before him, who had lifted impossible weights and carried impossible burdens and refused to give up even when the universe told them they should. Marcus roared with effort, and the beam began to rise. His muscles tore, and his bones creaked, and his vision went white with agony. But the beam kept rising, inch by inch, until there was finally enough space for a Valorian to crawl through. "Go!" he screamed. "Go now!" Kira scrambled through the gap first, followed immediately by Saleith, who had to force herself to leave the human behind. Marcus held the beam for what felt like an eternity, his arms shaking, his legs buckling, his whole body begging him to let go and accept defeat. Then he threw himself forward through the gap just as his strength finally gave out, and the beam crashed down behind him with a sound like the end of the world. He lay on the floor of the corridor, unable to move, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. Small hands grabbed his arm and pulled, and then larger hands joined them, and together the two Valorians dragged his broken body the last few feet to the sealed bulkhead. South slammed her palm against the emergency release, and the door hissed open to reveal bright lights and clean air and the shocked faces of station security, who had finally come to investigate the strange power surge behind them. The corridor collapsed completely, sealing away the forbidden zone forever. Marcus Cole had done the impossible. He had kept his promise. The laboratory door was made of reinforced metal designed to contain biological hazards and chemical spills, and it was sealed so tightly that not even air could pass through its edges. Marcus studied the door with the careful eyes of an engineer, while Kira pressed her small hands against the viewport, watching her mother struggle to breathe on the other side. "The manual override is inside the lab," Marcus said, more to himself then to the child. And the station's power is offline in this sector, so I cannot hack the electronic lock. So we cannot get in? Kira asked, her voice cracking with despair. I did not say that, Marcus replied, his mind racing through possibilities like a computer processing data. I just said it will be difficult. He walked along the walls of the corridor, examining every crack and seam in junction with intense focus. His eyes found an old ventilation grate near the ceiling, then traced the path of a damaged power conduit that ran along the floor, and finally settled on a pattern of structural damage that told a story only an experienced spacer could read. There, he said, pointing to a small service hatch at the far end of the corridor. That leads to the maintenance tunnels that run between the hulls. If I can get through there, I can reach the emergency power junction and force the door to release. Kira's 4 eyes blinked with confusion. But the maintenance tunnels are exposed to space. She said, I can see stars through the cracks in the walls. There is no air out there. I know, Marcus said calmly. You would die. Maybe, he admitted with a shrug, but probably not if I am fast enough. Humans can survive in vacuum for a short time if we are lucky and determined. Kira stared at him as if he had suddenly grown a second head, which was actually possible for some species, but definitely not for humans. You would go into the cold nothing, she whispered, into the void where no living thing can survive, just to open a door? Marcus knelt down in front of her and took her small cold hands in his large warm ones. Listen to me, Kira, he said in a gentle but serious voice. Your mom has maybe 20 minutes of air left in that lab. By the time I could find another way in, it would be too late. And I did not come all this way and fight through all these tunnels just to watch her die through a window. But if you die, then nobody can save her anyway. Then I had better not die, Marcus said, with a grin that did not quite reach his eyes. Now I need you to stay here and watch through the viewport. When the door opens, I need you to run inside and pull the emergency. Release on the equipment that is trapping your mother. Can you do that? Kira nodded, tears streaming down her face once again. Good girl, Marcus said, and he stood up and walked toward the service hatch with the steady steps of a man who had accepted what needed to be done. The hatch was jammed, but Marcus forced it open with a grunt of effort, and a spray of rust beyond was a narrow crawl space filled with pipes and cables and, just as Kira had warned, sections where the outer hull had been torn away to reveal the black emptiness of space stars, glittered in that darkness like cold diamonds. Beautiful and deadly and utterly without mercy, Marcus took several deep breaths, filling his lungs with as much oxygen as he could hold. He thought about Sophie back on Earth, thought about the bedtime stories he used to tell her before everything went wrong, thought about the way she used to laugh when he made silly voices for the characters. He thought about Kira and Salaith, 2 strangers from an alien species who had no reason to expect help from anyone, let alone a tired human cargo hauler with nothing to gain and everything to lose. He thought about what kind of universe he wanted to live in, and whether that universe had room for miracles. Then Marcus Cole exhaled once, inhaled deeply one final time, and crawled into the void. The cold hit him immediately, a cold so intense that it burned his skin and turned his blood to ice in his veins. His eyes bulged as the vacuum tried to pull the air from his lungs, and he felt blood vessels burst in his nose and around his eyes from the sudden change in pressure time seemed to slow down as he dragged himself through the crawl space, his fingers already going numb, his vision starting to blur at the edges. 90 seconds. He told himself, 90 seconds before brain damage and death. You can do this, you stupid, stubborn ape. You can do this. He found the power junction, a tangle of wires and circuits that controlled the emergency systems for this section of the station. His fingers were too cold to feel anything, so he had to watch his own hands as they worked, disconnecting cables and reconnecting them in a pattern that would route power from his own ship's backup cells through the station's network. Somewhere behind him, his ship was draining its emergency reserves to give him the electricity he needed. 60 seconds gone. His chest was burning, his lungs screaming for air that did not exist. The wires sparked and crackled as power flowed through them for the first time in hours. 40 seconds left. His arms felt like they were made of lead, and his vision had narrowed to a tiny tunnel of light surrounded by darkness. Marcus found the final connection and jammed the wires together with frozen fingers that cracked and bled from the effort. The emergency release activated on the other side of the wall. He heard the blast door hiss open. 30 seconds. He had to get out of the vacuum, or he was going to die. But his body did not want to move anymore. His muscles had given up. Move. He commanded himself. Move or die. Move or let that little girl lose everything. Move, move, move. He dragged himself back through the crawl space with the last of his strength. Lungs burning, heart pounding, vision fading to black. His hand found the edge of the service hatch and pulled. And suddenly, there was air around him. Beautiful, wonderful air that rushed into his lungs like a river of life. Marcus collapsed on the floor of the corridor, gasping and coughing and shaking so hard that he could hear his own teeth chattering through the open doorway of the lab. He heard Kira's voice crying out in joy as she pulled the emergency release and freed her mother from the fallen equipment. Mom! Mom! Are you okay? I brought a human to save you. He went into the cold nothing for us. Marcus could not see what was happening because his eyes were swollen shut from the vacuum exposure, but he heard the sound of two Valorians crying and holding each other. And that sound was worth all the pain he was feeling. Then he heard another sound, a deep groaning rumble from the walls and ceiling around them. Oh no, Salaith's voice said with sudden terror. The power surge has destabilized the support struts. This whole section is going to collapse. Marcus tried to push himself up, but his arms gave out and he fell back to the floor. How long? He managed to croak through a throat that felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper. Minutes, Salaith replied, and he could hear her footsteps approaching. We have to move now. But you cannot even stand. Human, what have you done to yourself? Marcus laughed, and it hurt more than anything had ever hurt before. What I had to do, he said. Now help me up, because we are not dying in this place. I made a promise to your daughter. And humans keep their promises. Small cold hands grabbed one of his arms, and larger cold hands grabbed the other, and together the two Valorians pulled the broken human to his feet. The station groaned again, louder this time, and somewhere behind them, a wall collapsed with a crash like thunder. They started running toward the exit, with Marcus leaning heavily on Salaith, while Kira ran ahead to scout the path. And behind them, the darkness swallowed everything they left behind. The security seal on the entrance to Sector 9 was supposed to be unbreakable. But Marcus had spent 5 years working on mining ships before he became a cargo hauler. And miners learned very quickly how to get through doors that did not want to open. He pulled a small tool from his belt and worked on the control panel while Kira watched from her perch on his shoulders. With wide and wondering eyes. What are you doing? She whispered, afraid that someone might hear them and stop the rescue before it even started. I am having a conversation with this lock, Marcus replied as sparks flew from the panel. And I am being very persuasive. The door hissed open with a grinding sound that made Kira cover her ears. And a wave of cold air rushed out from the darkness beyond. Marcus could smell smoke and chemicals and something else that made his human instincts scream at him to run away as fast as he could instead. He stepped forward into the forbidden zone and let the door close behind them. The corridor beyond was a nightmare. Emergency lights flickered red and orange, casting strange shadows on walls that were cracked and broken, like the bones of some great beast. Cables hung from the ceiling like dead vines, sparking and hissing with dangerous electricity. The floor was covered with debris from collapsed sections. and Marcus had to climb over piles of twisted metal that cut his hands and tore his clothes. Which way? He asked Kira, who was trembling against. His neck with fear, the little Valorian pointed, with one shaking finger toward a side passage that looked even darker and more dangerous than the main corridor. My mom's lab is 3 levels down, Kira said in a voice barely louder than a breath. We have to go through the maintenance tunnels because the main stairs are gone. Marcus nodded and started walking, his boots crunching on broken glass and scattered equipment as they moved deeper into the damaged sector. Kira began to notice things about her human rescuer that made her feel both safe and terrified at the same time. His body was so warm that she could feel heat radiating from his skin, like a small sun. And to her cold-blooded Valorian senses, it was like being carried by a living furnace when a piece of falling debris cut his arm and blood began to flow. He simply wiped it away with his sleeve and kept moving without even slowing down when they reached a collapsed section that blocked their path. Marcus grabbed a metal beam that must have weighed as much as 3 Valorians and lifted it out of the way with nothing but the strength of his arms and back. Kira remembered the stories her mother used to tell her about humans. Stories that all Valorian children learned as warnings about the dangerous species from the death world called Earth. They evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every single day, her mother had said. A planet with extreme heat and extreme cold, with predators that hunted them and diseases that ravaged them, and natural disasters that destroyed everything they built. But they survived? Young Kira had asked with innocent curiosity. They did more than survive. Her mother had replied with a strange mix of fear and respect in her voice. They conquered the terrible world. And then they reached out into the stars to find new challenges because their own planet was no longer enough to test them. They are persistence hunters. Her mother had continued. That means they do not chase their prey with speed or strength. Instead, they simply follow and follow until their target collapses from exhaustion, because humans never stop, Kira. They never ever stop. Now, watching Marcus climb over obstacles and push through barriers that would have stopped any other species, Kira understood what her mother had meant. The human was bleeding from a dozen small cuts. His breath came in ragged gasps, and sweat poured down his face despite the cold air. But he never once suggested turning back or giving up. They reached a junction where 3 tunnels met, and Marcus paused to study a damaged map display that flickered on the wall. The shortest path is through there, Kira said, pointing to the middle tunnel. But my mom always told me to avoid it because there is a section with bad air. Marcus looked at the tunnel and then looked at Kira with serious eyes. How bad? Very bad, Kira admitted. Valorians would die in seconds if we breathed it. And even species with stronger lungs would become sick very quickly. Marcus thought for a moment, and then he smiled in that strange way that made Kira's heart beat faster with a mixture of hope and confusion. Okay, he said. Here's what we are going to do. I am going to put you inside this emergency bag. And then I am going to hold my breath and run through that tunnel as fast as I can. And you are going to stay completely still and trust me. He pulled a sealed emergency survival bag from a wall compartment and held it open for her. Humans can hold their breath? Kira asked in disbelief, because Valorians needed to breathe constantly and could not stop even for a few seconds. Not for very long, Marcus admitted, but long enough, I hope. Now get in the bag and do not open it no matter what you hear, understand? Kira climbed into the bag and felt Marcus seal it around her, trapping her in darkness but also trapping clean air inside with her. She felt him lift the bag and start running, his footsteps pounding against the metal floor with a rhythm that reminded her of a heartbeat through the material of the bag. She heard sounds that terrified her. Marcus coughing and choking as the bad air entered his lungs, his breathing becoming more and more strained. His footsteps stumbling and then recovering, the run felt like it lasted forever. But it was probably only a minute or two before Marcus burst through a door and collapsed on the floor on the other side. Gasping and wheezing as clean air filled his damaged lungs, Kira pushed open the bag and climbed out to find her rescuer lying on his back. His face red and his eyes bloodshot, coughing so hard that his whole body shook. "Are you okay?" she asked, tears forming in her eyes again at the thought that this human might die trying to save her mother. Marcus laughed, and it was a painful, choking laugh that turned into more coughing. "I am fine," he managed to say between gasps. "That was nothing compared to the time I had to repair a hull breach on the wrong side of the airlock. Now that was a bad day." He sat up slowly and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of blood on his skin from where the bad air had burned his throat. Then he looked at Kira and smiled. And his smile was warm despite the pain in his eyes. "Come on, little one," he said as he pushed himself back to his feet. "Your mom is waiting for us." And I promised I would get you to her. They continued through the damaged tunnels, and Kira no longer felt afraid because she knew something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Humans were not monsters or beasts or mindless death worlders. She were protectors. And once they decided to save someone, nothing in the universe could stop them. The final corridor opened up ahead of them, and through a cracked viewport, Kira saw something that made her heart leap with joy and terror. Her mother was there, alive but trapped beneath a fallen piece of equipment. Her blue skin pale and her breathing shallow as the air in the sealed lab slowly ran out. "Mom!" Kira screamed, pressing her hands against the glossolith, looked up with exhausted eyes, and saw her daughter. And then she saw the human standing behind Kira, with blood on his clothes and determination in his gaze. For the first time in hours, the trapped scientist allowed herself to hope. The coffee tasted like burned plastic and regret. But Marcus Cole drank it anyway because he had been awake for 36 hours and needed something to keep his eyes open. He sat alone at a small table in the crowded food court of Galactic Transit Station Omega-7, watching dozens of alien species walk past him without a second glance. The TOS station was a massive structure that orbited a dying red star, and it served as a meeting point for traders and travelers from 100 different worlds. Marcus had just finished a long cargo run through the outer reach, hauling medical supplies to a colony that nobody else wanted to visit because the route was dangerous and the pay was terrible. But that was the kind of work humans got in this part of the galaxy. Most species looked at humans with a mixture of fear and disgust, calling them Deathworlders because they came from a planet filled with predators and poison and extreme weather. Marcus did not care what they thought of him. He just wanted to refuel his ship, get some rest, and find another job that would pay his bills. The station shook slightly, and Marcus looked up from his coffee with tired eyes. There had been small tremors for the past few hours, and the station authorities had announced that some sections were unstable due to seismic activity from the dying star. They had sealed off Sector 9 completely, saying it was too dangerous for anyone to enter. Marcus had heard rumors that people were still trapped down there, but the station officials had declared the rescue not cost-effective and moved on with their day. That was how things worked out here in the galaxy. If saving you cost more than you were worth, nobody would come to save you. He was about to take another sip of his terrible coffee when something small crashed into his legs with enough force to spill the drink across the table. Marcus looked down and saw a child, but this was not a human child. The little creature was barely tall enough to reach his knee, with pale blue skin that was almost transparent and 4 large eyes that glowed like tiny moons. Those 4 eyes were filled with tears that ran down the child's face like rivers, and the small body shook with desperate sobs. The child grabbed Marcus's pant leg with tiny fingers and held on like her life depended on it. "Human, please," The child cried in broken common, the trade language of the galaxy. "Human, please help me." Marcus set down his ruined coffee and knelt down to meet the child at eye level, his heart already beating faster in his chest. "Hey there, little one," he said in the gentlest voice he could manage. "What is wrong? Where are your parents?" The child sobbed harder and pointed toward the sealed corridor that led to Sector 9, the forbidden zone that everyone had been told to avoid. "My mom," the child wailed. "My mom is trapped. She is down there, and nobody will help me, and they say she will die, and I do not want my mom to die." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach as he understood what the child was telling him. He looked around the food court and saw that other species were watching this scene with mild interest. But none of them moved to help a group of Tovani merchants, with their gray skin and 6 arms, whispered to each other about acceptable losses and how it was sad, but nothing could be done. A Kreth mathematician with its insect-like body calculated the odds of survival and shook its triangular head, clicking its mandibles in what passed for sympathy among its kind. Velocirator with fur the color of rust actually stepped backward, as if the child's grief might be contagious. None of them moved to help. None of them even tried. Marcus looked back at the crying child and felt something hot and fierce wake up inside his chest, something that had been sleeping during his long and lonely journey through space. "What is your name, little one?" he asked softly. "Kira," the child stammered through her tears. "My name is Kira, and I'm Valorian, and my mother is Salaf. And she is a scientist, and she was working in her lab when the ceiling fell down, and now she is trapped, and the air is running out, and nobody will help me save her." Marcus had heard of Valorians before. They were a peaceful species, known for their intelligence and their fragile bodies that could not handle harsh environments. A Valorian child like Kira would die within days without adult care. And if her mother was truly her only family, then this little girl was facing a death sentence along with her trapped parent. "The station guards," Marcus said. "Did you ask them for help?" Kira nodded so hard that her whole body shook. "They said it is too dangerous. They said the rescue would cost too much money. They said my mom should have left when the warning came. But she did not hear the warning because she was deep in her work, and now she is going to die, and it is not fair." The child collapsed against Marcus's chest, sobbing into his dirty work shirt with all the broken-hearted grief that only a child can feel. Marcus wrapped his arms around the tiny creature and held her gently. Feeling her cold body tremble against his warm human skin, he thought about his own daughter back on Earth. A little girl named Sophie, who was about the same age as Kira. A little girl who he had not seen in 2 years because cargo runs in the outer reach pay better than any job he could find closer to home. He thought about how Sophie would feel if she was lost and alone and crying for help, while everyone around her looked away. He thought about the kind of man he wanted to be, and the kind of man he had been pretending to be for too long. Marcus stood up with Kira still in his arms and looked toward the sealed corridor that led to Sector 9. The warning signs flashed red and angry, telling everyone to stay away, promising death to anyone foolish enough to enter behind him. A Torvani merchant laughed and said something about stupid Deathworlders to his friends. Marcus did not turn around. He did not have time for creatures who had forgotten how to care about anyone but themselves. "Kira," he said quietly, "I need you to listen to me very carefully, okay?" The child looked up at him with her 4 wet eyes, hope and fear fighting for control of her small face. "You are going to take me to where your mom is trapped," Marcus said. "And I am going to get her out of there. Do you understand?" Kira's eyes went wide with disbelief, but the guards said it is impossible. They said the tunnels are broken and the air is bad, and the walls could fall at any moment. Marcus smiled, and it was not a kind smile or a gentle smile. It was the smile of a man who had decided to do something dangerous and was looking forward to it. "Little one," he said, "I am human, and where I come from, we do not believe in impossible. We just call it Tuesday." He set Kira on his shoulders so she could see over the crowd and point the way. And then Marcus Cole walked toward the forbidden sector while everyone else watched in stunned silence behind him. The Tovani merchant stopped laughing in front of him. The red warning lights flashed their useless threats, and in his arms, a little alien girl who had lost all hope began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her mother might survive after all.